Good morning, everyone. I will start by saying I'm very excited to be here. I'm very excited by this workshop. I would like to thank the organizers, in particular Cathy, for inviting 23andMe. This is really a privilege for us to be here. And it's also a great opportunity to show you some of the results that we have recently on cognitive traits and a little bit more of what we see the future and how we are thinking new ideas about cognitive traits. Today I decided to organize my talk in 3 parts. The first part, I will briefly present 23andMe products, and in particular, 2 of our new reports on neurodegenerative disorder. I will introduce what is 23andMe research platform, how this is linked to our products and how we are interacting with our customers. In the second part, I will present some new results on GWAS, on studying the genetic basis of substance use disorders. And finally, on the last part, I will try to show you what we are working right now. So it's really completely in development, is some new way to collect data, and in particular using web tools. This set of tools, we are calling this cognitive tools. So let's start, and please stop me every time that you have a question. We will put more interaction on this talk. So let's start with the products. This is 23andMe Kits, is what an individual customer can buy. How it works is very simple. We are a direct-to-consumer service, genetic service. So you can just go in our website. You will receive this kit that you saw on the previous slide. We are using saliva, so you will have to spit on the kit, putting back the tube on the kit, sending back to us the kit, and a few weeks later, you will receive your raw genotypes, and you will also receive genetics report from your genetic data. So right now, we have more than 70 reports that are meeting FDA requirements. This number is growing all the time. We are releasing new reports all the time, and we are working very hard in relation to FDA to follow their rules. The reports are organized in 5 different categories. You have, obviously, ancestry composition report about your ancestry. We have traits and what we call wellness report. Traits can be morphological traits, prediction of the morphological traits like eye color. Wellness is your weight and other type of traits. We have report on if you are carriers of some monogenic mutation that are in general all monogenic disease. And we have genetic health risk. And today I will just present 2 of these new reports that we have for the genetic health. The first one is on late onset Alzheimer's disease. So I will spend a little bit of time on this slide because I want to show you a little bit the customer experience and what is receiving as information. So what you have on the right side here is a screenshot of one of our customers. So this is 23andMe webpage. So the customer have his home with his profile, the report, and I will explain what is this report. You have also some tools that you can use to do more advanced analysis, in particular in terms of ancestry. And there is this tab that I will talk a little bit later about the research. This particular customer is consented, so she accepted to do research. So under this tab, she will have information about the research by itself, but also all the tools that we are using to collect phenotypes. So let's go back on this particular report. For this report, we are analyzing a variant in ApoE, and we are reporting on this variant. If you are clicking on this scientific detail, the customer will have access to more scientific detail about the gene, the variant, and why we are analyzing this variant. This particular customer is not a carrier. If she was a carrier, she will also receive more information of potentially the next step, in particular genetic counseling. But what we are trying to do is giving quite a lot of information and try to educate our customer if you are carrier or not carrier, because we think this is important in general for making decisions about your health, but also is very important for research. The second report is on Parkinson's disease. For this particular report, we are analyzing variants in 2 genes, LRRK2 and GBA. Again, you have the scientific detail of this gene. So we are very, I would say, proud of this 2 report because it took us quite a long time to be able to present this report to our customer. But obviously, in terms of science, they are not completely satisfying because these 2 traits are not monogenic. They are highly polygenic, and also the late onset Alzheimer's. So we are working quite hard to develop risk scores that are more polygenic risk scores, and it's something that we are expecting to convince the FDA that we can do also for this kind of disease. It's not something new for us. We are already doing this on other type of traits. So for example, this is eye color, or we are presenting, so on the left side is the report. Let me just start by the right part. The fact this is polygenic, we are giving in general a little bit more information and trying to be more descriptive of the biology of the trait, the genetic or the score is described, but also we are giving information of why you have other factors that can explain this thing. The report also is a little bit different. In general, what we are doing is reporting probability is not something that are completely obvious for the majority of the customer. So in general, we are reporting the probability for, in this particular case, to have the probability to have lighter eyes, but we are comparing with, for example, a random individual from your own ancestry. So this is European ancestry. So we can see here that this particular customer have a high probability to have blue eyes, and is relatively is much higher than what you have for a random customer that are from European ancestry. All right, so this was briefly what we have in our product and the way that we are thinking our next report. I will now introduce what is our research platform, 23andMe research platform, and how this is working. It's starting when a customer said that he wants to participate to research. So we have an opt-in system. The customer can go in the website and click and saying, I want to participate to research and share my data. It's a completely IRB approved protocol. The customer has to sign consent form. The protocol by itself is not specific to a phenotype, but we can collect quite a lot of phenotypes. We have some regulation, but it's pretty large, and when the consent, we can send quite a lot of survey on different fields. If, as a customer, you decide that you don't want to be participating to research anymore, you can just go in the website and saying, I'm not participating, and we are not using anymore your data. And the data are completely anonymized. And when we are sharing data for publication or with our collaborator, we are never sharing the raw data, raw genotypes or raw phenotypes. It's always summary statistic. So in general, this is aggregated data. So now we have consented customers. In general, they are very engaged. They are telling us that we can use their genotype to do analysis, but now we need to collect phenotype. We don't have phenotype for them. So we have, and when I say phenotype, it's covering a huge range going from family history to personality to disease. The way that we are collecting is online. We are doing this online, so on your computer. And in general, we are using 2 types of collection. The majority of the ones that we are right now are based on surveys. You are answering questionnaires. But we are developing a set of new tools, and I will present at the end one of these sets that are called cognitive tools. So now with all of these things, the research team can work. We are expecting to do science, and we are expecting to make discoveries. So there is a lot of advantage of doing online research. It's super easy to use for our customer. You just have to be home and taking your computer and filling some form. It's also super easy for us to recontact customer and have more information, ask them to fill more surveys. Theoretically, there is no geographical barrier, and an individual is not participating to one cohort or one phenotype. He's participating tons of phenotypes. You can be cases for a particular disease, but control for the other. So it's permitting to do very large cohorts. So let's take a look at our data, what we have right now. So right now, 23andMe have more than 3 million customers. 85% of our customers are consenting to research. And we are not doing much on this thing. They are just receiving an email, and the people are consenting very easily and very happy to participate to research. 75% are already fill at least one survey. And right now, we collected more than 9 million data points. So with this very large, just an information about which samples we have. So our data set is, I would say, a little bit old cohort. This is people that are on average 49 years. We are pretty well balanced between men and women. Something that I'm not seeing here that are pretty interesting is, in fact, we have a little bit more data points for women because women have a tendency to fill more surveys than men. And this is our ancestry. Our ancestry is dominated by European ancestry, is more than 3/4. But we have a lot already and very strong cohort in Latino, African American, and East Asian, and they are really very valuable cohort. For the moment, we are publishing and analyzing many European because we have quite a lot of data on this thing, but we are spending more and more time trying to analyze and see what's happened when we are looking in different ethnic groups. So with all this data, we are able to build a cohort for different traits. And here I just put only disease and an example of 8 traits, but we have thousands of these traits. And you can see the number that we have. So I was talking about Parkinson before. We have 15,000 cases of Parkinson in our cohort. In general, we have a lot of control. And when we say confirm, we can really be pretty sure that they don't have the disease in some way. We have almost 500,000 people that are reporting cardiovascular disease. So we are able to do a lot. We have this big number is helping us a lot to do GWAS, but also other form of analysis and prediction. We are doing something that are a little bit more advanced in terms of engagement that we call 23andMe communities. So here what we are trying to do is it's particularly highly valuable for diseases that have not a very high prevalence. So we are trying to engage the people in different ways. So, and they are organizing events, they have Facebook page, and the goal is to connect the people together. One of the goals for research is very valuable because now these people are engaged and we can really contact them more often, looking for longitudinal data, have follow-up with them, reconcile them for some other analysis. I showed 3 examples of this. This one was launched, the Parkinson's disease communities was launched a long time ago in collaboration with Michael J. Fox company. And I showed you before that we have 15,000 cases, but 11,000 of these people are engaged in this community and working with us. Finally, I hope I convince you that the only reason that we are able to do research is, in general, the people are very willing and very engaged and very happy to share the data. But we are trying to engage more these people. And the way that we are thinking this thing is a little bit this virtuous cycle, or we have these people that are saying, yes, I want to participate to research. We are making discovery, publishing paper, updating our program. So some of the discovery will directly go in the product. But we are also trying to return a lot of information to the people in different way and highlight. So when you are filling form in surveys, for example, if you are filling a certain norm, you win some kind of information and you can really have information about the survey that you fill or some other survey. So we think that this particular loop is really valuable and is creating a good way to do research with engaged customers. I will just pause 2 seconds here. Do you have questions about 23andMe products or 23andMe research platform? This is 23andMe that are owning the data. But again, the customer, first, if you are, in extreme case, you can have the analysis and you can decide that not have profile. You can delete everything. You will have your genotype. What you're losing is we are updating the report all the time. So you lose this update. But at the moment you are answering the phenotype, for the phenotype, yes, 23andMe is owning data. But again, if you are saying, I don't want to participate anymore, we are stopping and deleting a part of this thing. And we are working in particular in Europe, we are working mainly in USA. But in Europe, there is, in the next 2 or 3 months, a new regulation that will arrive, trying to regulate globally this thing. We think this is a good thing. And we are trying to align all our products related to, and all that are related to this 218. It's not really existing for the moment in US. The FDA is regulatory, they are making a lot of regulation, but it's a little bit points regulation. This European new thing is a big framework that are trying to regulate a lot of this thing, in particular genetic data, and how you are using this and how you are protecting this. So yes, we have competitors. Ancestry is one of them. We don't have direct competition. Oh, I'm sorry. The question was about competitor and the possibility of sharing, and some people also are in the different cohorts. So yes, I would say the genetic, there is a lot of demand on genetic testing. We are growing super fast, and it seems that we are not able to fill this growing. We have multiple competitor. I would say the more direct is probably Ancestry, but we are competing directly on the Ancestry part, composition. Ancestry for a moment is not really working really on health. At least they are not releasing this. They are not able to give to their customer information about your health, but probably they will go. We have other competitors. So Ancestry is pretty big. There is probably overlapping. We are working on crossing, and we have discussion on some of the things, because people in particular that are doing, that want to know the Ancestry, sometimes we don't have the same database. And for example, if you are looking for relatives, you will maybe do the 2 tests because you want to use the 2 databases to do this thing. And if you're happy, maybe you will start to answer some questions. So there, yes, there is, we have competitor. We think it's good because it's really opening the field and it's really pushing us to do a lot of things. For the moment, I would say we are the only one that are direct to consumer, FDA regulated, but it will probably stop very soon, or some people will come. And there is more specific more specific product, color genetics. There is a lot of people that are in this field. We are probably the more advanced also in terms of research and really engaging the people. But I think the people see the value of doing this, and I think we will have, and you're right, a lot of the things that we will have to do at some point is looking at how we are sharing information, what we are analyzing, and all these things.
If you raise your hand, someone with a mic can get to you. We'll take one more question maybe, then get the rest at the end.
Yes, I can go.
Do you want to just, okay.
You haven't gotten a chance yet to present results, but somehow the implication is that this is because it's a large database, it's representative. But how do you deal with the bias that you have to be wealthy and informed and sophisticated to even think of contacting 23andMe, doing the procedure, filling out the data, et cetera?
So I think you are completely right, and who cohort had bias. I would say it's not the only bias, because you have also people that are coming that are not wealthy, but they really want to know where they're coming from. They really want to know, I don't know my father, and I'm ready to pay to have this information. And we have also people that have disease that maybe are not wealthy and coming. So, but it's still creating bias. It's not a random samples of the American population, of the European ancestry. So there is not a lot of way to deal with this. This is a very big problem, because I don't think there is an absolute sampling. People in hospital have also bias. There is bias everywhere. So in terms of looking at the distribution, you can try to look at the distribution. We have more possibility to deal with the phenotype by itself and the collection, because globally we can record a lot of information. We can know if our question is good, because if the people are answering, I don't know, a lot of time, probably our question is not good. If they're spending too much time to answer the question, probably is not good. So we have a lot of way to deal of the quality of the phenotype by itself. It's much more difficult to deal by the sampling by itself. But I think this is not specific to 23andMe. It's specific, I think, to everybody that's doing sampling. Is very hard to do. If you really want a non-random sampling, it's really a big problem to do this. And it's not obvious that you want a non-random sampling, a random sampling all the time. Sometimes you want a very specific one that you know already the bias. But it's a very important question when we are publishing this result, and how we can extend the conclusion that we are with this kind of cohorts.
So I give you my saliva, you analyze my DNA, you want to engage me. Can I download my data?
Yes.
Do I have access to it?
Yes. You have access to your genotype. I was saying the first thing that you are receiving, so I cannot go back, but you can directly explore your genetics, not only the report, but we are analyzing. You can have access to your genotype. You can download them. Our customers are using this and uploading of other websites. This is your data, and you can have this thing. And just one thing, we are using genotypes, so what you are downloading is only the genotypes, so the number of variants that we are analyzing. I can come back on this thing.
Sorry, do you want to just hold your questions? We'll have time at the end. Thanks.
Maybe.
Maybe.
Let me move. I will try to go a little bit faster on this part. How much time I have? What time is it? Oops. I will present this project, the genetic result of this project. This is a project that we started 2.5 years ago with a great group of people that are led by Abraham Palmer. Sandra was the main analyst outside 23andMe, and she's the lead author of the first 2 papers that we have. In our side, I was working with Sarah, that are project manager, and Matt, that are in charge of survey collection. The goal of this project was to identify the genetic basis of substance use disorder, addiction. We have multiple names. We call this decision-making, so it's possible that I will slip and call this decision-making, but it was really analyzing addiction. Let me pause 2 seconds to explain why I decided to present this particular project. You will see it's probably not the more spectacular in terms of genetics of the result that we are recently, in particular, in this kind of traits. But the way that we found the problem, I thought was very interesting. The term was already introduced of omnigenic. We know after 10 years or 15 years of GWAS that what we are expecting for the majority of the trait is highly polygenic, very small effect. And it's very, very difficult to identify modules. You can show that you have enrichment, but it's very difficult to really pinpoint on some things. It's very difficult to find exactly the target. So there is multiple possibility why this is the case. It's possible that really the majority of the traits are really highly, and you have all the modules in our genome that are acting on traits. Another possibility is that we are maybe using 2 generic traits, and we are not integrating too much. In general, what we will do if we are doing something on drug dependency, I will measure have a measure of drug dependency that can be very simple. Are you drug dependent? Yes, no. And I have a case control and I'm running this analysis. Here I take this picture. In fact, Sandra liked a lot this figure, so I picked directly from this slide deck that are coming from this particular paper with Stanley that are talking about impulsivity and substance abuse. I will talk about this later in animal model. And what I like in this figure is the way that they are thinking what's happening in your frontal cortex. Is not, you have what they call a downward of addiction, and drug dependency appears some part here. But all of this particular, so here is when we are starting to use drug, all this particular phenotype can be genetically determined and be heritable. So potentially when we are analyzing this, we are analyzing a complexity of subphenotype, and it's very difficult to separate them. So this project was really thinking about analyzing quite a lot of subphenotype that permit potentially to aggregate all the data and figure out what is the different modules that are playing on drug dependency. So it was a little bit the big picture. The way that we did this, we designed a completely new survey that are containing 136 questions. This survey contains 6 different, what we call instruments. One is dealing with impulsivity, what we call daily discounting. We use a very standard 27 monetary choice questionnaire that are called MCQ. And we have information about behavior. So we have different index that we measure, in particular risk-taking. We have obviously your drug exposure and your alcohol usage, and some information about, or some index that are measuring relationship, action, and those. So we are trying to figure out what is the personality and how the people are behaving and that are leading to drug dependency or substance dependency. For this particular study, it was 2 years ago, we were able to collect to have 23,000 consented, 23 participants from European ancestry that answered to this 130 question. At this time, we were able to collect this in less than 4 months. Now we will probably be able to collect this probably in 1 month. Like I said, we have already 2 papers that was published on this on this different scale, and we are working right now publishing and analyzing more in more depth all this analysis. So the paper are these 2. I will only present very quickly the result of this result of this paper. So this is a phenotype that we call daily discounting that probably many of you know, is measuring your level of impulsivity. Globally, this is a set of questions that are asking, a set of 27 questions that are asking, would you rather have $34 today or $50 in 30 days? And depending on your answer, you are a person with high impulsivity that wants immediate reward, or you are a person that are low impulsivity with a daily reward. So we were able to compute this particular thing, and we run a GWAS analysis. So for the moment, I didn't talk at all about the genetics, so maybe I should talk a bit about the genetics. So what we have at in the research environment is we have genotype. So we are using genotyping that was done on 4 different arrays that are containing between 600K and 1 million variants. We have different arrays because we are producing new arrays regularly. So if you are an old customer, you were analyzed 10 years ago and your array was a little bit different. We are using imputation, for this particular case, 1,000 genome phase 1. And what I will present is an analysis that are containing 15 million variants that are containing SNP and indels. This is what we are using for these 23,000 samples. This is the main slide for the result. So it's a standard GWAS. This is the Manhattan plot. So we were not, with 23,000, we were not expecting to have too much GWAS. So we were pretty happy to have one significant, GWAS significant loci. This is the locusome plot. So this is, you see that this is just barely passing, but it's a very nice signal that are directly on the gene. There is no coding variant, like often, everything is on the intron. And it's interesting because this GPM6B, if this is the signal that are on this gene, is associated with serotonin transporter, is expressed in the brain. And we have some evidence and some report that this gene is associated to suicide in depressed patients. So it looks really good. Like I said, we were not really expecting too much result. What we were really focusing is more on the genetic correlation with other traits. Maybe I can say, if you are measuring the heritability based on the genotype, is measuring something that are 12%, that are much lower than what we think is the true heritability of the delay discounting, that are probably more in the 40 or 50%. But with this pretty, I would say, small data set, is already a big data set, but pretty small data set of what we have right now, we were able to show quite a lot of genetic correlation with interesting traits. So here, I can, for example, eye impulsivity is correlated. So the positive correlation is with eye impulsivity. So it's correlated with ADHD. Schizophrenia is negatively correlated. And you have things that globally we are expecting major depression, depressive symptom is also correlated with this thing. We have interesting result in smoking. That was also, we have some evidence that it should be the case. No evidence, for example, on cannabis, but this is a small data set for them. At least it looks no correlation. And we have also information on, for example, eye correlation with the year of education and your IQ. No correlation in eye, that was a little bit out of control. So this first study was very encouraging. We are still working on publishing other traits that we have in this analysis. But we think now that we can really expand and we can collect much more samples, and trying to do what I was saying in the beginning is really to have a more integration of all these traits and trying to figure out. So we are very interested on discovering loci, because we think it's useful to do use, but also to understand globally the dynamic of dependency, or sorry, addiction. We are interested on analyzing this correlation and trying to figure out how this is working. All right, so let me just finish quickly. I think I have, I will take probably 5 or 6 minutes to do this thing on what we are developing right now, what we call COX tools internally. So the majority of the thing that we are doing until now is collecting data with surveys, but there is tons of other ways to collect data. Obviously, Fitbit, obviously your phone is collecting, but also we have trying to implement different type of web tools that permit to analyze more quantitatively, a little bit more quantitatively, and trying to have more precise phenotype, in particular subphenotype. So some of these tools are very simple. So let me show you. This is, I will show you a couple of videos, or more than a couple, 4 videos that are about what the customer have to answer. So is one of the things that you have to do. In this case, is just called pointing speed, and what the customer have to do is doing this thing. You have a dot that are appearing on your screen, and you have just to go and click on this dot. Very simple. But in fact, there is already quite a lot of analysis or of information on this thing. There is, first, a lot of metrics that you can measure, how fast the people are doing, how accurate they are. But each point can be pretty far, so all the difficulty you can modulate a lot of things. So we are still exploring this kind of results, but I just want to show you, so maybe I want first, again, to explain, to show you how we are educating and trying to engage your customer. So in this case, is after the result, the customer receives his score, and is receiving some of the metric, and in general, we have comparison with other participants in our database, and we are explaining, oops, so this is bigger, so we are really explaining which metric we are measuring. We explain at the beginning what we are trying to do, but often the customer understands better when he already did the analysis, and he can understand what is the result of this thing. So we are reporting the result in comparison of the other people, so this person seems to be a little bit slower. The speed, the higher it is, the better it is in terms of reaction. And also, we are giving really much more information about what means the test and why we are trying to do this kind of thing. This is really, like I say, we are working very actively, so I will not present too much result on this thing because we have still a lot of problem to do, but you see that we are able to collect already a lot of samples. And here is just a point on the speed and the accuracy relative to age, because one of the reasons we are using this particular tool is we think that there is correlation with age. And we are expecting, for example, that the speed will decrease with age. But it's interesting, for example, here is very interesting that the accuracy is increasing. And you have some difference between men and women. Women have tendency to be faster, and they are also a tendency to be more precise. So we think that there is a lot of information. Like I said, we are working very actively to figure out what is the right metrics. It's not completely sure that this is the right one and this is the right one to do analysis or genetic analysis in particular, and also for using this as covariable. I will show you two other.
Are those touch screen, or are they using a mouse?
So this is all the. So this is the mouse. But all the problem that we have is people have different computers. People have different browsers. You can do this on your tablet with your finger. So it's why, for the moment, I'm not presenting more results, because we are still finishing to calibrate all these things to be sure that we have no bias. And the nice thing is the fact that we have so much data, already almost 80,000. If you had only 200 samples, you will not see this bias. But at 75,000, you see immediately all these bias. So we have quite still a lot of work to do for everything that are using the mouse and the pointing. And you will see we have few of them that are like this. The next one is just using your space bar. Is still already making difference depending on your computer and depending on also the brand, not only the brand, the speed of your computer affect the result. So we are still working very hard of trying to have really a very, so for the moment, it's crazy, but this 70,000 is almost a calibration. It's not a pilot, it's just a calibration test, and we'll have to collect more data to be able to really do analysis on this thing. The next one is a pretty hard one. So the idea here is, what you see is really what the customer see. You will see only black and white picture of cities or mountains. So it's called sustained attention test. The goal here is you will have photos that are coming on this thing, and each time you see a city, you have to push on the space. If you see a landscape, or in particular mountain, it's mainly mountain in this case, you are not pushing on the space. And you will see it's pretty fast. And by the way, our customers are playing only one time because we are collecting this thing from one time. Some people are sending us emails saying that they want to play more. But you see, this is really fast, and it's really quite long, so it's really trying to measure the sustained attention. And it's very simple, use spacebar. It's very frustrating. At some point, you are losing the track, and it's starting to be very difficult to follow this thing. Again, we are giving some information on this thing. For this particular test, it's very interesting because, in general, the people are very good to report the correct one. So this person here is not standard. The standard people are reporting 97% of the time they are pushing the bar correctly on the city. It's much more difficult to not press the bar when this is a mountain, and we have much more error. So it's, again, two of the criteria that we are using. This test, by the way, like the other one, are pretty well established. It's not something that we are starting from scratch. People are already using in lab. All the problem that we have is deploying this thing in a large data set and be able to collect consistently this data. Again, for this particular, we have, again, very interesting pattern. We are still expecting that the accuracy of the city is decreasing with age. And here, men and women are globally performing in the same way. There is probably significant with the size of the, we already collected 33,000 people. But again, we have this accuracy of the mountain, or there are some kind of optimal around 50 edge and some different. Again, we are calibrating all of these things, so I don't want that you are remembering that it will be the final result, but the patterns are very strong. I will be very surprised that they are moving so much. So again, we think that we are able to characterize some of cognitive process using this thing. And I will show you finally two. This one is very simple. You will see dots that are yellow and blue that are just flicking. And one of these dots is changing color. And you have to identify which dot it is. Ready? Found it? You want to replay? I swear it was the right one. Okay, so very simple. Is also we can measure a lot of things depending of the size, how much is flicking, where is the distribution. So there is a lot of metric that we can measure on this thing. It's also dependent of, we can measure the speed, we can measure, but again, it's dependent on this thing. And again, it's not new tools, it's something that are established and we think that are really useful. Okay, I will just show you a last one that are a little bit more simpler to analyze and also well established. Then 5 minutes. So I need only 1 minute, I think, and I will stop here. The last one is a very famous test that are trying to measure, in particular, risk-taking. So it's what we call the balloon inflating challenge. The goal of this game is to inflate this balloon. And the way that I'm doing this is I'm pushing space. And at some point, I can stop, and I will have the point that I have for each time I'm inflating. But at some point, the balloon can explode. And if exploding, I have 0 points. So very simple thing, and you have 30 balloons to do this. So the way this is working is like this. Again, very, very simple. There is no much more that I can. So the customer is inflating the balloon right now, and he decides that he don't want to take any more risk. He's keeping the point, okay? And he's playing the next balloon. And here the balloon is exploding. Okay, so super simple. This don't have too much problem of calibration, so we were able to do quite a lot of work on this thing. Again, you can analyze quite a lot of things. There is already a lot of parameters that you can put on this thing. We analyze just the average of pump that the people have. So this is the distribution for 27,000 customers. One of the problems that you see immediately is, in general, this is great to have quantitative trait, but you have immediately problem of distribution that are not normally distributed. You have quite a lot of long strain. When you're analyzing this for phenotype, it's not too much a problem. It can be very quickly a problem in terms of genetic data. Rare variant will appear very quickly if the people are carrier of rare variant on this thing. So be able to calibrate, but also to have right distribution is always a problem on this thing. So in this case, we decide just to explore a little bit how this is working. We decide to just analyze quartile. In this particular case. So this is one way we decide. So we analyze only one metric that has the average point, and we decide to use 4 categories. And what we try to explore, and this is the nice thing with 23andMe, is now we have all the surveys. So I can look how this metric is behaving relative to other questions that we ask to people. And when we are doing this in this particular test, and here is not, previously I showed you genetic correlation. This is just phenotype correlation, okay? Here we analyze 385 phenotypes that are mainly on education, attainment, personality, and life trait. This is the odd ratio. We are correcting for ancestry and sex and other things. So this is our standard way to do this. And I just put some of these things. And what we are trying to see here is how much this thing is recording interesting information. So year of education is highly correlated with your capacity to take risk, I will say, or to have multiple pumps. I think we have, I'm not sure that I put the risk here on this thing, I didn't. But you see, this, and by the way, this is some of the traits that we are asking to the people. Some are very simple, having a messier desk. This is just our phenotype, this is the direction how is going. So, and it's interesting that a lot of these traits are very interesting in terms of genetics. They are very simple to collect, flossing less, but they are giving us a lot of information. So I will stop here. This is something that we are actively developing. We think that we have a lot of possibility of doing this. We are trying to calibrate, and in particular, knowing which metric is recording what. And we are starting to do genetic on this thing. So I will stop here. Like I said, all these things is only possible because 23 of the research participants are happy to share their data. This is the research team, but a lot of the 23andMe employees are working, all the infrastructure that we have to build to collect this data. This is the people that are here. I highlight these 4 people in particular for the cognitive tool. Catherine spent a lot of time developing this tool. Olga did the analysis on the BART. And Claire is spending really all his time right now to really calibrate this tool. And Cody is a project manager that are trying to involve people and trying to convince them that we are doing the right thing. I will stop here and thank you for your attention.
Thank you. We have time for 1 or 2 questions, and people with microphones will head your way. There's one up in the corner there.
This might be something you already know, but these simple tests of reaction time and recognition are correlated maybe 0.3 or 0.4 with general intelligence. So if once you get the data cleaned, and if you have SAT scores, I think those are on some of your surveys, you should be able to find a pretty strong correlation between the SAT score of the person and how they perform on the simple tasks.
Yeah, we see this. There is quite a lot of correlation between this thing. And there are good phenotype to measure.
Down here.
How do you deal with fake survey answers or like people lying on their tests or something? Like, is there any way to, I don't know, fix that or have a way to include that in your research?
So it's an excellent question because obviously you have people that are coming and you can just, the first thing, basic thing is the people are not really lying. They are starting the survey and after 10 minutes they are distracted. So here we have measured, or we can see how the survey is done. You have people that are systematically liar. We have a GWAS on this, is pretty interesting. So the way that we are doing this is not so easy to detect. A lot of our questions are repeated in multiple surveys, so you can look if they are consistent on this thing, but it's a huge problem. You have just people that are not paying attention, that are answering question A all the time. So you have the speed or they are answering. For example, for the particular MCQ that are the monetary questionnaire, the MCQ contains 27 questions, but we decide to add 3 questions that are completely reversed. Globally, we are asking to people, do you want to have $60 now, $10 in 50 days? Okay, so they should answer, obviously, no. Okay, so we have way to do this. It's always a problem. There is things that are, and the better control we have on our phenotype, the better we can control on this thing. So we are deploying, we are finding the more data that you have, the more bias you see in this kind of thing. What I say are the obvious one. In general, the way that we are doing this, we have so much data that we can just exclude them. So we are not trying to quit. I say that we are trying to treat a GWAS, but in general, we are just removing these people and trying to remove. But this is a great question.
Okay, actually, thank you, Pierre. There'll be time for questions during the coffee breaks and lunch. Thank you.